Good morning, everyone. Thank you all for coming, and welcome to today's Research Bureau program, Balancing the FY13 Budget. Has the crisis passed? My name is Roberta Schaefer, and I'm the president of the Research Bureau. And we'd like to express our gratitude to the Massachusetts College of Pharmacy and Health Sciences for hosting today's event, and especially to President Charlie Monahan for all that the college does, not only for the Research Bureau, but for the city of Worcester as well. Today's program is part of the Research Bureau's Francis Harrington Forums on Municipal Government. We're grateful to our 2012 presenting sponsor, Commerce Bank, and to our 2012 leadership sponsor, Polar Beverages. Today's event sponsor is Harvard Pilgrim Healthcare. The Research Bureau also wishes to express its appreciation to the Telegram and Gazette for advertising today's event, and the City of Worcester Government Channel under the direction of Judy Warren for videotaping it. Please be sure to visit our website, www.wrrb.org, where you can read and download all our Research Bureau reports, as well as announcements of upcoming events. And just a quick reminder about a few upcoming Research Bureau events. March 15th at 5 p.m. at Assumption College is our Thomas S. Green Awards for 2012. All are welcome to attend, and this year we've chosen 4 outstanding municipal employees to honor with this prestigious award. On April 3rd, 4 p.m. at Assumption College, there will be a forum to discuss strategies for recruiting and retaining the best teachers. And on May 2nd, at 7:45 in the morning, in this room, we'll have an all-star cast to discuss strategies for revitalizing downtowns. And finally, to wrap up the spring season, which is upon us, on May 30th at 4:30 at the DCU, the Research Bureau's 27th annual meeting, and we're pleased to announce that Eric Rosengren, the president of the Boston Federal Reserve Bank, will be this year's featured speaker. Again, my thanks to a growing list of sponsors for all of these events. It's now my pleasure to introduce Mike Mulrain, who's going to serve as today's moderator. Mike is the Chief Operating Officer at Polar Beverages, where he previously served as the CEO since 1995 and has helped the company complete over 30 business acquisitions in the past 15 years. During that time, Polar has grown from $50 million in annual revenues to over $325 million today. He has also led several real estate expansion projects in Worcester and in the company's New York location that have resulted in the addition of nearly 400 jobs, raising the number of Polar employees to 1,500, one of the largest employers in the city. Mike is a graduate of Bentley College. He became a certified public accountant and worked for 10 years at Deloitte & Touche in Boston, and then worked in investment banking for 5 years before joining Polar. Oh, I forgot to mention that Mike is the current chairman of the Research Bureau Board of Directors. Mike Mulrain.
Thank you, Roberta. Being chair has certain privileges, as you can probably find out. We're always looking for volunteers. Today's program is certainly a relevant topic. I think we can't go a day without reading about budget challenges on the state and local level, whether it's school budgets, whether it's municipalities. I think we're all pretty familiar with the challenges, and I think we also realize that there's really no silver bullet, I think as we'll hear today, to fix a lot of the issues and the challenges that confront us. Today's program, we've got a couple different perspectives. We've got the Perspective of the Commonwealth at the state level. Pam Coker is from the Office of Administration and Finance. Pam is going to share with us a little bit the state's perspective and maybe talk a little bit about local aid, and I'm sure she'll field a lot of questions afterwards. And then we've got the local municipality perspective at two of our largest cities in New England, namely Worcester and Hartford. Our own Mike O'Brien from Worcester, the city manager, and David Panagore, who's the chief operating officer of the city of Hartford, will talk a little bit about the respective challenges of attempting to balance the budgets in their respective cities, and then I think we'll get a good kind of meshing of topics here. From a format perspective, each presenter is going to talk for about 15 minutes. There'll be some PowerPoint presentations filtered in, and then at the end we should have plenty of time for questions and audience participation. So we're going to start off with Pam and kind of give the state's perspective. So just a little bit about Pam. Again, I'll introduce each speaker before they present. Pam is the Director of Local Policy for the Executive Office of Administration and Finance, serving under Secretary Jay Gonzalez and former Secretary Leslie Kerwin. In her leadership role on municipal issues of importance to local government officials and the Patrick Murray administration, Pam works on policy and finance matters affecting local governments statewide, as well as working with individual communities on specific projects. She also works with agencies where state activities impact cities and towns. Her recent specific responsibilities include the following: overseeing the implementation of the new municipal health insurance reform, the lead developer of the Patrick Murray administration's municipal relief legislation, the administration and finance point person for state fiscal oversight of the city of Lawrence. Also the secretary's designee on the Pension Reform Commission, and she serves as chief of staff for Regionalization Advisory Commission chaired by Lieutenant Governor Timothy Murray. With that, Pam Coker.
Good morning, and thank you for having us here. I think this is going to be a really fun panel for me because I haven't gotten to spend enough time in the city of Worcester, but I've been recently reading the Research Bureau's report on the successes the city has had in managing healthcare costs. And we know you're getting some great results here in the city of Worcester with some of the new reform opportunities. And it's also great to see Dave Panagore, who I engaged with a bit when he was in the city of Springfield, and I was working for the state, engaging with Springfield. And it's also always great to hear what your neighbors are doing and how they're handling the kinds of challenges that you might be facing. So it'll be terrific to have the Connecticut perspective as well. And I'm responsible here for kicking it off with the state's perspective on fiscal year 2013. I'm going to talk a little bit, as Mike said, about the governor's budget proposal for the next fiscal year, local aid, and if there's time, maybe one or two other things of interest to municipalities, including the current progress under the new municipal health insurance reform. To set up our approach to the state's fiscal year 13 budget, I'm first going to talk a bit about revenues to set the context in the picture so we know what amount of resources we're dealing with, and that leads to understanding some of the choices we have had to make this year. The fiscal 13 budgetary spending for next year will be $32.3 billion. That's a growth of 2.98% over the current fiscal year's estimated spending. And while tax revenues are expected to grow next year, and in fact we just yesterday announced that in February we saw an improvement in tax revenues over the last 2 months. However, tax revenues are only growing modestly and not to the extent that we need them to grow to support the demand for state services and restore many of the program funding cuts or staffing levels that were the product of trying to get through the recent economic downturn. So in general, things are Looking on the upside, we see some good indicators about employment in Massachusetts compared to the rest of the country, and we do see tax revenues starting to improve. However, we're having to dig ourselves out of such a deep hole from the fiscal crisis of the last few years that presents an enormous challenge, particularly because at the same time we're projecting continued growth in demand for healthcare programs and our safety net programs, which typically see a significant increase in caseload during an economic recession. While we are taking a number of steps to contain growth in these programs, the additional amount needed to fund growth and costs in these programs and in certain legally obligated funds like debt and pension, we're challenged because those obligated programs will exceed the growth in the budgetary resources we do have available to support fiscal year 2013. So the bottom line is that as a result, total spending across state government will actually decrease in FY13 because we are having to support legally obligated programs. We're trying to make investments in a few key initiatives, but we're still struggling to find the resources through revenues and other sources to bring back to the point where they were several years ago, key programs and supports for our residents. The budget does include 2 new revenue proposals. One is the elimination of the tax exemption for candy and soda, and the other is to increase the tax on cigarettes and other tobacco products. Other than those types of smaller revenue initiatives that we're pursuing specifically to support public health and our health insurance programs, we don't generally see that there's an appetite in the legislature for any significant tax revenue increases. So we've got some money to work with, but it's not as much as we would like. A little bit better than last year, but we're still finding it very challenging to program the resources that we have, and we're needing to really prioritize the issues that we want to focus on for the coming year. So what we're doing as our plan for FY13, given these challenges, is we did seek and achieve a structurally balanced budget, and it does minimize the use of one-time resources compared to last year. We have found some opportunities to drive innovation and change the way government does business. And we're investing particularly in the governor's 4 priorities, which are closing the education achievement gap, job creation and returning people to work, addressing healthcare costs, and pursuing opportunities for positive youth development and youth violence prevention. Our budget does include cuts to government services, reduction of state employees, and eliminations of a few programs and facilities. At the same time, we're pursuing some strategic investments to ensure that we have a strong economic recovery. And one of our major themes for this budget is changing the way government does business. And that's really to find the most efficiencies that we can in the way that we do business and be able to use taxpayers' dollars, a precious resource, as best we can, particularly in these difficult times. And as we look forward to the future, we want to make sure that we're making smart choices about how we're using the state's limited resources now to give an even better foundation for the decisions that we make going forward with the state. We do seek to preserve funding for critical investments for cities and towns as well. The Chapter 70 funding for K-12 education is at its highest level in state history. And we do continue to provide, as I said, funding for targeted programs and supporting the achievement gap. We are also supporting veterans programs, including as they relate to city and town costs for those programs. The Department of Veteran Services will now reimburse cities and towns that do have homeless shelters for 100% of the homeless veterans' costs, and also start funding 100% of the benefit costs for new annuitants. And then we are also focusing on making significant levels of investment in infrastructure to support job creation today and lay the foundation for economic growth going forward. And the latest example of that is yesterday the governor filed a transportation bond bill that included $200 million for the Chapter 90 local road program. As has been the custom the last several years, our intention is to work with the legislature to move that bill quickly and get communities their letters of authority to spend their share of that $200 million in time for this coming construction season beginning April 1st. There are some reforms that we're pursuing in the budget. As I said, we're looking for efficiencies and opportunities to make the best use of our resources to meet various goals, and at the same time do it as efficiently and effectively as possible. When we're thinking about the business climate here in Massachusetts and economic development, we're looking at reforms to our community college system. We want to better focus and coordinate the system to give students the skills that our businesses need and give students those opportunities to match with the workforce opportunities in the state. We're also looking at reforms to the governance and management of our public housing authorities. We're looking at reforms to our correction system and our public defender system. And we're looking at ways to make some of the backbone services of state government more efficient, including the way that we manage and maintain our facilities. Our biggest challenges for the coming fiscal year and the years beyond are going to be to continue to maintain a structural balance. As I said, projected state costs are going to continue to outpace available budgetary resources, including primarily revenues. Another big challenge is controlling healthcare cost growth, as historic growth rates are unsustainable. And the governor has made it a priority for his 4-year term that he's going to complete in a few years. One of his primary goals for this term is to produce some healthcare cost containment opportunities. We do have some interest in working with the legislature. Speaker DeLeo just announced yesterday his thoughts on putting a benchmark on managing healthcare costs. So that conversation is definitely starting to move forward now on all fronts. The other thing that we see as the biggest challenge for the future is addressing long-term liabilities. Unfunded employment benefit liabilities, particularly retiree health care, are going to present a significant challenge for the future. And as we have spent some time in the last few years working with the legislature on changes to the pension system to sustain that, we also now need to turn our eye to these other post-employment benefits to manage that liability so that we can make other critical investments as well. A couple of words about local aid. As I mentioned, Chapter 70 funding is $4.136 billion this year, and that produces a distribution through the Chapter 70 formula that has all districts receive at least equal, if not greater, funding than they are getting in fiscal year 2012. For unrestricted general government aid, a key resource for cities and towns, we are following the same approach as we did for this fiscal year, FY12, where we say that we're able to produce $833.9 million as of July 1st for cities and towns for that standard program. And then we expect to be able to award an additional $65 million into that program as of October or so of the coming fall, once we see what surpluses are available from the FY12 budget. Now, last year we took that approach and there was some concern about whether or not we would be able to do that additional funding restoration in October based on the previous year's surpluses, and we were, and we anticipate that we will be able to do that again. Of course, there's many months between now and then, but we are looking to manage the FY12 situation, particularly in the last few months of the fiscal year, to be able to provide that full support for cities and towns through the general government aid program. And then I just want to talk very briefly, if I have another minute or two, just to let you know how we're doing with the new municipal health insurance reform that was signed by the governor in July. That program has really started to take off. We're seeing significant savings. So as we talk about the challenges at the state level for budgets and that affecting cities and towns, this new reform expedited process for allowing cities and towns to make adjustments to their health insurance plans, specifically focusing on plan design, that's an opportunity for communities. And communities are already seeing some savings in this fiscal year, and some are doing the work now to produce some savings that they can use as they do their fiscal 13 budget development in the coming months. Since Governor Patrick changed the municipal healthcare cost conversation by initiating this year's effort with filing his reform proposal last January, more than 100 communities have taken some steps to address their healthcare costs. And that we lump into those 100 a number of different approaches. That includes communities that, because that conversation started, found the opportunity to reach agreement with unions through traditional bargaining in the past year. Other communities are using the new reforms decision-making process to make changes in local plans or join the GIC. And some are even just starting the process by adopting the new local option reform or scheduling a vote and will be adopting soon. So we're seeing many communities focus on getting a handle on their municipal health insurance costs. And some are beginning the steps, some have already completed the steps, and some are just putting their toes in the water and getting started on thinking about how they might address this issue with the new opportunity available. Now, this process involves negotiations with unions for a 30-day period, and if it doesn't reach resolution between labor and management at that point, there's a 3-person review panel that includes representatives from the municipality, the Public Employee Committee, and an impartial provided by the state with agreement of the 2 other parties. Now, so far, we've had 18 communities go through and complete this new reform decision-making process. And whether it was to work with unions to agree to join GIC or make changes in their local plans, all of those decisions have been made in those 18 communities within the 30-day negotiation period. We haven't seen any community have to go to this closure mechanism of a review panel to get some resolution. So we're very pleased to see that the changes are being made at the table with both management and employees working it out together. And we're seeing right now with the communities that have completed the process over $36 million in savings being realized. And a portion of those savings accrue to the municipality, but also employees get a significant share of those savings as well because they see premium reductions that mean more money in their pocket. And they also receive a share of the total savings as employers program mitigation programs for them, including premium holidays and health reimbursement accounts for folks that are high users of the system or have chronic illnesses. So we're seeing a lot of activity going on with that reform. We're seeing it achieve savings, whether communities are doing it on their own by continuing their existing collective bargaining negotiations, but perhaps with a little bit more urgency, knowing this other expedited process is out there. And we're seeing communities benefit by joining the GIC to achieve their savings and also to make changes locally so that they can stick with the providers that they and their employees are all comfortable with. We've got another 19 communities in the bargaining process right now under the new reform. And that activity suggests that many folks are looking at this new reform opportunity as a way to get a handle on healthcare costs as they go to plan their FY13 budget. And I think we'll be hearing about the FY13 budget at the local level next. Thank you.
Thank you, Pam. If I put my polar hat on for a sec, I probably could go on for hours about how we feel about certain proposed taxes in the 13 budget, but I'll save that for a later date. As Pam said, we're now going to switch venues a bit and talk about our local municipalities, and first up is going to be Mike O'Brien. Most of you here certainly know Mike. Mike was appointed as city manager in 2004 and has worked for the city of Worcester since 1994, serving as Commissioner of Parks, Recreation, and Cemetery for 7 of those years. Among his many accomplishments since becoming city manager a few are as follows. Mike helped attract more than $1.3 billion in planned or current economic development in the city, helped reorganize all departments to streamline the implementation of government services, redesigned municipal employee health insurance benefits to rein in the unsustainable costs, saving taxpayers over $100 million. Also introduced new technology to enhance customer service for permitting, developed a customer service center for citizen requests and complaints, and helped establish a business model financial forecasting to improve the city's bond rating. Again, Mike O'Brien.
Thank you, Michael. I'm going to quickly bring up a PowerPoint presentation here. And from beginning. All right. Well, good morning to you all. It's a pleasure to be here. I've got 15 minutes, so it's going to be a speed round for me. It's usually my introduction is 15 minutes. So we're here to talk about has the budget crisis passed? And as I read that title, I could only think of two words: kidney stone. And trust me, some days the management of this resource does feel like a kidney stone. But with that, getting into the realities of adaptation, much of this was covered, from a Commonwealth perspective. But what we've had to deal with through the recent past with the nature of the world economy. Unrestricted state aid, that's what funds basic city services. So it's one of our four main revenue categories, reduced by 37%, a dramatic reduction, some loss of $21 million of annual revenue to the city that we use to fund the basics, police, fire, Department of Public Works, and beyond. Those unrestricted local aid numbers are the equivalent of 1988. That's what we used to receive in 1988 for basic city services. Local receipts, again, you're seeing this in the private sector. On the city side, all of our receipts down almost 17%, which is, again, the dollars that we use to provide the very basics of services to our community. And as you'll hear repeated, and you've experienced in the private sector, the realities of revenue growth because of a staggering economy, not even coming close to keeping pace with fixed cost. Just a quick snapshot in that slide just gives you some perspective. We're seeing the increases in Chapter 70 funding, which we're grateful for from the Commonwealth, to fund our public schools, but you can see that steady decline in state local aid. And again, we're still grateful for each and every dollar the state shares in that commonwealth, but the reality is it falls well short of inflation and fixed cost growth. The reality of that sensitivity to the economy in this slide gives you some perspective of what we faced as a city when we look at the variety of revenue sources, motor vehicle excise, permits, new growth, all of those you can see in that dramatic downward arrow. We're seeing some signs of hope, obviously between fiscal 10 and fiscal 11, some increases, and that brings optimism, but we're still very guarded as we look at the world economy, certainly the national economy. So how do you manage to stabilize in that kind of economy? We talked about this last year in great detail in this forum. We've downsized government dramatically. Just over the last few years in this economic downturn, we've lost over 225 positions, literally 15% of our available workforce. Deep cuts, all departments have experienced those deep cuts. We've restructured all departments. We've become more efficient. We've used technology and other means to be able to manage through this, and as a great tribute to the team that I'm blessed to have, we've risen to the challenge. Through difficult negotiations, but understanding from our union perspective and otherwise, we're all in this together. We've had no wage increases over 2 years, and we've taken on dramatic health care changes for our employees and retirees, working together, and reserve building. And it just goes to the leadership of council and the community. In the past, when we've had free cash and available revenues at year end or from additional state aid, those were typically spent on wish lists that could be recurring costs. So you'd bring on new staff, you'd take on costs that we'll see each and every year, and instead we put those dollars aside for reserve building. And I think it shows restraint, and it shows that we're able to prioritize and understand the economy that we're working within. Well, you can get an idea of what healthcare reforms have done by this slide. From the years of fiscal 1 through fiscal 5, you could see that skyrocketing arrow on the left-hand side as you look at the PowerPoint presentation. We are on a trajectory for healthcare costs to be well over $100 million by this year. And through reforms, and that's working with our employees to take on a greater share of their costs in healthcare. When I started, employees were paying 10% of their premiums, and co-pays were as low as $3 for office visits. Through those reforms, we've talked about this in this forum, difficult to get those reforms done through collective bargaining. Our employees are now paying 25% of their healthcare costs. Co-pays for office visits are now $20, and we've got many more categories of co-pays. And what I will say really reflects our community and collaboration and out-of-the-box thinking about really defining solutions locally. We brought on some pretty dramatic changes to how we provide healthcare to our employees and retirees, working with a local healthcare company, Fallon Community Health Plan, working with our local hospitals, and working with our employees. We developed the Worcester Advantage Plan, and the employees have found it to be, from a cost perspective as well as access to health care, a benefit. And by implementing that last year, we were faced with dramatic layoffs. Last year, if we weren't able to rein in health care costs, we were able to have a majority of our employees migrate to that plan, and we were able to save dramatic dollars. And now we're looking at retirees and beyond as to migrating to the Worcester Advantage plans. $5 million roughly saved last year, redirected to basic services, and we're beating the GIC rates at the state for what they're seeing for increases from their healthcare providers. Fiscal year 2011-2012 year-end results. We managed to increase our deposits to reserves. Again, 5-point financial plan, managing government just like a business. So in the midst of this difficult economy, in the midst of challenges and pressures on our services, we're making deposits to reserves, planning for the worst, which could always happen, and making sure we've got the necessary dollars there to address any cataclysms or emergencies. Improved bond rating. Our outlook is very positive. Fingers crossed, I think next year will be our year. We'll probably see an increase to our bond rating because we've been doing everything right. And believe it or not, at fiscal year end, on fiscal 11, we eliminated the snow deficit when we had 70 inches of snow in about 7 minutes. We were able to address that, even though that our annual set aside in the budget is about $3 million for snow. We had about $7 million worth of snow expenditures, and through the great work of Tom Zadelis, Chief Financial Officer, Budget Director Jared Connor, we're both here today, we managed to close our books with the cooperation of council, balanced books for fiscal year 11. On 12, we're on target relative to a balanced budget, in that our expenditures to date are consistent with that budget. Police overtime costs are up. We'll talk a little bit about what we'll be doing relative to police manpower levels. We're at the lowest levels in history as to manpower at the police department based on the economy, but we've got to start looking at that long term. And snow removal costs are lower than anticipated, and that's an exclamation point next to Yahoo. Promising fiscal year 2013. Again, managing from the 5-point financial plan, just like you would do in business, we're looking at our revenues and expenditures. We're making educated assumptions as to where we believe the budget will be, and then we're engaging the council and the community in the discussion. Early projections going back to last November showed we have approximately an $8 million deficit to solve in order to balance the budget for fiscal year 2013. We're looking at now in adjustments to that as we get closer to submitting a budget to council. Improved revenues and expenditures. You saw that trend between fiscal 10 and 11. Revenues are improving. So we see on that $8 million deficit an ability to reduce it by $1.5 million. Thorough efforts on our property revaluations underway with the cooperation of DOR. We believe we can reduce our overlay deposits because we won't have people requesting abatements or looking for other relief through that process because the numbers are so thorough and the effort's been so exhaustive. Increased new construction growth. We're seeing positive trends. I've been very conservative on what we put in the budget for revenue growth on new construction, holding it artificially low on that revenue, but we believe we can adjust on that. And then through our cooperation with our federal partners, we're going to see additional grant funds to help fund our manpower levels at the fire department. Health insurance reform. This continues to pay dividends. And again, the value proposition with our employees, we're seeing migration from the higher cost plans to the Worcester Advantage. And with the complete implementation of these reforms and what we're seeing for premium rate increases from our providers, we're going to save some $3.3 million off of what we projected. We factored around 8 to 9% premium increases. We'll see the half of that for a number. So we'll see some $3.3 million as a result of that. So we're down to a deficit of $3.2 million, but it's not an easy one to solve. Although I'll look at it in perspective, $32 million were some of the deficits we face at this time of year just 2 or 3 years back. $32 million of difficult cuts and reforms and reductions. So $3.2 million at least gives us a chance to take a deep breath. But we're at the bone. Public's expectations of services are high, and so we've got to continue to find new and innovative ways to address that $3.2 million deficit. There is talk of additional local aid in the governor's budget. We're grateful for that, but it's really one-time money. It's not recurring revenue we can count on. The way it's structured in the budget is if they hit certain revenue benchmarks in July, August, and September, they'll release an additional $2.6 million to the city. So we'll look at that carefully in this budget solution. There's a potential for us to look at non-recurring one-time monies that are in our operational budget and then budget that $2.6 million against those expenditures. And if that money does arrive, we'll be able to pay for those one-time expenses. If it doesn't arrive, we won't do those tasks. So that could be everything from long patch, where we patch roads that have seen better days, crosswalk painting, things like that, all one-time expenses within the budget. But that's a gamble, and so I got to look at that carefully when I'm making the decisions before I submit to council. We've also seen dramatic federal budget cuts, and we expect more to come as the federal government grapples with its budget deficits and long-term liabilities. Future liabilities, both pension and OPEB. Pension obligations, and this is what gets us, has the budget crisis passed, and we've got to start focusing in on these. And these aren't easy topics, and because they're not immediate in their need, they're often pushed aside or not necessarily dealt with. But I'm going to be a very squeaky wheel in these two categories as we go forward, because they're starting to show their ugly face, if you will, within our operational budgets, and as we go forward, they'll draw away from services. On our pension obligations, we have a $300 million unfunded liability, and you'll see in the graph I'll present that we're required now to have increasing pay-as-you-go contributions, and that goes well out to 2035, again, drawing away from our ability to provide basic services. Over time, it's going to become a bigger and bigger percentage of our total budget, and the question comes down to where's that revenue going to come from to meet that obligation. OPEB, other post-employment benefits, was discussed by the Commonwealth earlier. It's basically retiree health care. Right now, we have a $765 million unfunded liability. This is a real liability. It's not fictitious. It's not a scare tactic. We own this. It's to pay for our retiree health care going forward. At this juncture, we don't have a trust fund set up to address this, and we have not begun to fund this liability. We've been dealing with it from the cost side. I'll go over that in a couple of minutes. Pay-as-you-go, we're paying $21 million out of our annual budget for retiree health care. And this liability is going to grow each and every year. And again, where is that money going to come from when we're really on fumes funding basic services and our obligations? This just gives you an idea of the increasing value of our pension costs as it pertains to our operational budget. And you can see that growth pattern. That's going to continue and actually start to escalate year to year. And we've got to start to rein this in, and I'll talk a little bit about that in the upcoming slides. This next slide just gives you an idea of what the total liabilities are between OPEB and pension and unfunded liabilities. $1 billion of unfunded liability, and that's a real number, folks. And I get it that this is a difficult topic, and it'd rather be ostrich-sized and as we look to just year to year and just trying to get by, but this is something that ultimately we're going to be responsible for, and we've got to start putting plans in place to address. So OPEB strategies, without that dedicated funding source, we focused on the cost side. I'll be working with a great team, Kathy Johnson from the Human Resource Department, my director, working with my budget team and chief financial officer. We'll be looking at additional reforms in healthcare, looking at the retiree side. For this upcoming year, we actually have to be able to continue to reduce that overall liability. We'll shave another $100 million off of that liability, so from $765 in OPEB to $665 through reform. Difficult, the council's credit adopting Section 18, which required all retirees at the age of 65 to go to the federal Medicare program, and that's been adopted. Other communities are still grappling with how to get that done politically to the council's credit. They've taken that reform on years ago, and it's paying dividends and it's continuing to go forward. I've talked about the implementation of additional healthcare reforms, and that's going to have to continue to reduce that cost on the cost side. But there's a limit to that reform. You can only accomplish so much to reform. and it's going to take far more action into ultimately getting this cost addressed, which includes building that trust fund. As to pension liability, it's known, and that can be better planned for when it comes to year. The healthcare issue is a difficult one because of the volatility. And in both of these issues, I believe it's going to absolutely require legislative and administrative action at the state level for us to ultimately rein it in. There's a copy of this PowerPoint as well as a report that I did to City Council on OPEB. They're available in the back of the room. It's engaged fireside reading, and it's all from the Ministry of Propaganda. I urge you to grab a copy on the way out. It's eye-opening as to what's ultimately required. And again, when you look at OPEB liability, we're gonna need state action, and that's could be everything from raising retirement age. They're all identified. We'll continue to work on the categories we can with local action, but we're gonna need the state's cooperation, and it's a difficult issue. Future liabilities, city infrastructure. As close as we are to balancing our budgets for fiscal 13, these are long-term investments that need to take place. We're limited in our 5-point financial plan to invest about $19 million of tax levy dollars annually. Our enterprise accounts like stormwater and sewer are all funded through the enterprise, but there's a limit to what the ratepayer can pay to be able to fund these. And so you can just go down a list. Our stormwater system needs major upgrades, our wastewater system, streets and sidewalks, major investment underway, but even more required, a dramatic backlog. Bridges and dams, believe it or not, Worcester is the star, it's the poster child. We have the most private dams of all communities in the Commonwealth. I guess years ago the policy was, damn it. But reality is we need millions of dollars to reinvest in those dams, and they're our responsibility. And we've got that work underway, but millions of dollars yet to come. And in our Worcester Public Schools, hundreds of millions of dollars required to bring our facilities up to standard. There's a program through the MSBA, Mass School Building Assistance, that funds 80%, but they're limited in how much they can participate with the city. We've got schools that are 135 years old, and we certainly got their useful life out of them, and it's now we need to reinvest. So we have to talk about those real liabilities going forward and how we'll ultimately get to that solution. So has the crisis passed? The short answer is no, and the long answer is no. I will tell you that crisis breeds opportunity, and the difficult decisions that need to be made need crisis to help to get to those solutions. We're going to continue to manage by the 5-point financial plan. Tough decisions lie ahead for fiscal 2013 and beyond. All of us are following fuel costs and what that's going to mean. We're an operational organization. We're out there on the roads, and when you look at $5 a gallon and beyond, and diesel even more, we're clearly going to have to grapple with our energy costs. We're building into our budget, obviously, the appropriate contingencies for that. I will tell you, through these difficult decisions, special interest groups will be very active, which means that the general population needs to become very active in the operations of government. We must govern with a sensitivity to those special interest groups, but we have to ultimately make decisions that are in the common interest of all. OPEB and pension liabilities will draw away from basic services. The pressure's there now. You're seeing it in those charts that I presented. The solutions, and I talked about OPEB and pension. No one wants to talk about those right now. They're somewhat of a dirty topic because they're complex and they will require difficult decisions that will affect special interest groups, but they can't be ignored. We have to begin working on these now. I remain optimistic. We've got a great city. There are great things underway, not without challenges when we look at crime and other aspects that are showing up throughout our community. But there are collaboratives across our community that are refreshing. We really do have a collaborative gene, and just yesterday we announced that our library system will continue to expand with a partnership with Holy Cross to roll out a mobile library system, which other communities are shuttering their libraries, and we're actually expanding. And that goes to the college and university system. They also are coming forward and donating sums through a pilot agreements to support our library. So keep smiling. You may not be able to stop it because I've released Prozac into the public water supply. And keep smiling because, as I note here, the Mayans were off by about 1,000 years on their prediction for apocalypse. So I believe with all that, we do have great things ahead, and with optimism, I think we can solve all the challenges before us. So thank you, and I yield the balance of my time, about 5 minutes, to Mr. Panagori. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mike. And David, you'll get your full allotment, don't worry. Next, David Panagor. is the Chief Operating Officer of the City of Hartford. Before that, David was Director of Development Services of Hartford. David is also a resident of Hartford. Before coming to Hartford, David worked for the state of Massachusetts, assigned to the Springfield area, and served as the city's Chief Development Officer, overseeing all development activity in the city. Before that, David held the position of Deputy Executive Director of the Springfield Finance Control Board. He has also worked as the Chief Negotiator for the Redevelopment Authority in San Jose, California, the Project Director for the construction of the Boston Convention Center, and Chief Legal Counsel for the City of Chelsea. With that, David Panagore.
Thank you all. Glad to be here today. You can see by this presentation, and as mentioned, after my years in Massachusetts and some in California, how lucky Massachusetts is. You have the Worcester Research Bureau. You got the Pioneer Institute, you got Mass Inc., you got Worcester Research Bureau. These are critically important institutions. Connecticut does not have this place for dialogue. So everybody here who supports this institution, I got to tell you, we don't have one in Connecticut, and it's our loss. So these are really cool things to be part of. Second, the issues that Mike mentioned, it's the same issues we've got. But our issues right now in Hartford are more pressing. So assume everything talked about for Worcester is facing all the municipalities, OPEB liability, health costs, etc. Ours is a little different. And this was the presentation I'm going to put together that we did in for our city council just last week. I'd also mention that in Connecticut, we're now moving to a better system. We now have a Governor Malloy who actually takes an active interest where we previously had Republican Governor Jody Rell, very nice governor she was, but it was essentially on a set it and forget it. And we're now making up for time in Connecticut that Massachusetts is far ahead of us. Last point I make there is there are no uniform laws in Connecticut regarding municipalities. We do not have a uniform code of ethics. We do not have a uniform procurement act. We do not have a uniform pension system. We do not have a uniform health care. We don't have a uniform life insurance. Everything is developed by every individual municipality. To give you an idea of the complexity in Connecticut, we're 124,000 in the city. We have over 160 healthcare groups in the city alone. That's what we have to manage. So with that, that's a little tone-setting stuff to say, you guys are really lucky to be in Massachusetts. As I've said to some other folks here this morning, being in Connecticut does make one long for the efficiency and effectiveness of the Massachusetts state government system. Pause for humor. So, in fact, though, everything is pretty much the same in Connecticut as it is in Massachusetts. We have the residents, we have the mayor, we have a very complex and convoluted government system with a whole bunch of departments. My job as the Chief Operating Officer is I am the line manager for the CEO. I run the day-to-day operations of the city. And I'm going to move quickly through some of these slides, not because the time is short, because I was told I'm going to take all my time, and I will, no, just kidding. But more so because we're going to put this up on the Worcester Research Bureau website, and I suggest people take a look through there, because some of this is more detailed than need be this morning. But to talk about our budget process, in Hartford, the mayor presents the budget to the council, but the mayor has sole authority over estimating revenues, so the mayor sets the level of the C. The council, on the other hand, can raise or lower any expenditure individually, and that's our budget process. It's been very contentious under our relatively new strong mayor system, but we've modified that by engaging in a committee of the whole process that, depending on the year, it's in its third year running, starts in about January or February, where we meet every 2 weeks to go over the budget process in the expenditures, revenues, debt. This Thursday night, we have an exciting session in Hartford City Hall on pensions, debt, and the capital plan. And it's worked amazingly well. By the time it gets to the mayor submitting the budget, the fights are over, the policies are relatively clear, and of course the tax rate isn't set, and that's always a fun debate, as we all know. But in general, we've had a much smoother process by working collaboratively over the last 3 years than previously. Now, in Hartford, to give you an idea of where we are, In Connecticut, we don't have, for another one, we don't have Proposition 2.5, which is sort of, in a Tip O'Neill way, a third rail of politics. No one touches 2.5. We all hate it, it doesn't work, but you don't touch it. In Connecticut, they pass tax reform legislation for Hartford every 5 years, and it's always a guess, and generally speaking, the law of unintended consequences always applies. What this means in Hartford, where in general in Connecticut, you're at a 70% valuation of your property tax, okay, what your fair market value is. In Hartford, over the course of 20 years, they wound up with a split rate. Business is taxed at 70% of its, which is the standard everywhere else. Residents are taxed at only 23%. Our tax rate, they call it in Connecticut a mill rate, is 71.79. But multiply that by 23% to get the residential rate, multiply that by 70% to get the business rate, or in other words, the business rate is 50 and the residential is about 18. So what does that mean when you add them all together? 47%. New Haven and West Hartford are comparative cities. West Hartford is essentially our call it our Newton in the Worcester area. I think it's more generalized. I can't think now who I'd say where the Richie Riches really live. Where's the Beverly Farms? But that's West Hartford. These other municipalities are doing a phase-in of their property tax assessment. Again, in Connecticut, your ability to limit the pain and kick it down the road is a common occurrence. So they're still phasing in revals from several years ago. As I say, for Hartford, we're at 47% is our effective percentage of valuation. So your tax is 71. As a community, you're only paying 50% of that mill rate. Now, those basically are the mill rate assessment ratios for all the municipalities in Connecticut. You see, for Hartford, at 21, we are wildly low for residents. We're very good value for residents, and we're wildly high for business, a very bad value for business. Our debt, fairly decent. Our debt service, fairly decent. Our budget, fairly not decent over the course of the last decade. However, what you see since 2008 has been a leveling out of that budget. Our Mayor Pedro Segura was council president starting in '09, and since that time, the years of growth have stopped. You see the red line, that is our projection for the city right now. I'll get to that in a minute. But we've been able to, over the past several years, be able to level out the budget. We've already gone through our rounds of layoffs. We've gone through our rounds of cuts. We are, like many municipalities, at the bone. Our revenue budget itself, general property tax is about 50%, state 46%, and then miscellaneous, your permits, your charges, your financing, and other revenues. So it's property taxes and state aid. For our grants, most of our grants, we actually as a municipality run half of the Section 8 funding for the Hartford area. HUD, our development services, youth services, that right there, that 15% for youth services in the light blue, that's essentially a lot of that is our early child care program. And our pre-K program is actually run out of the mayor's office rather than out of the school department. As part of the reforms that happened under our strong mayor system, the mayor is able to appoint half of the school committee. And finally now Mayor Segura, in his first full term, he was elected in his own right. He replaced Mayor Eddie Perez when Eddie Perez was convicted. Mayor Segura has now just appointed his own school committee. And we expect significant changes to occur where we bring into alignment the goals of the school department and the goals of the city. As you see, 13% of our overall grant funding goes to public safety and 11% to health and human services. We've just this year created a grants department with 2 full-time grant writers, and we've actually centralized our CDBG. That's our community development block grant funds. Commonly, those are found in your development services department. We've moved it out of development services and moved it into the city as a whole to maximize its value across all departments rather than making it a pet of the development services. And I say that as a longtime development service director, that I know how it operates. Our expenditure budget. Our expenditure budget, again, half is on education, 12% is on benefits and insurance, which is about the same amount as in public safety, debt service 6.7, non-operating budgets 5.8, but look at general government, it is 4.2. Again, when you talk about cutting things to the bone, once you pull out public safety, benefits and insurance, debt service, and education, you're not left with much. Staffing, public schools, nearly 3/4 of the operation, public safety, an additional quarter, and the remaining is everyone else. Again, we've made all the moves we can make to cut the budget. Here are the numbers, if you want to see them in a number basis, 3,000 in the public schools, 1,000 in public safety, and pretty much nobody after that. Now, this represents the work that's been happening over the last several years. There is our general fund balance change. 06, it was disappearing. 07, you start really grabbing it. 08, 09, they had to grab a ton of it. That was, among other things, the belief that you could sell the liens on motor vehicles. So there was sale of bulk liens for taxes owed on motor vehicles, a challenge to do when the good actually rolls. So since that time, we've been able to reverse the trend and continue to add fund to the fund balance, so that our fund balance right now is continuing to grow. We expect to be able to do so again this year. However, this year, our current status is, and this is what's happening in Hartford every year, we are always operating against an annual deficit. We do not use a employment freeze. We use what we call a long chill, and we put between 60 and 120 days between every hire. With the turnover that we have as the city of Hartford, it's sort of indigenous to Hartford, with the high turnover that we have, we're able to save between $4 and $7 million a year over the course of the year, just by limiting and reducing our hiring practice as a cost-saving device. Mitigation strategies, I won't go through them. The idea of this slide was to just basically say to you, wow, look at all the stuff they're doing. But I will say that the state has been very good under Governor Malloy to keep the money that we've had in place and to be able to increase our revenue through general sales tax. I point out to you, though, the second line under revenues that says intergovernmental Pequot. This is the reality of casinos in Connecticut. Many stories could be told in this one line. Number one, the money is going away. Even without the Massachusetts casinos, the revenues going to the state being shared with the municipality are not there. This, of course, will also be further reduced when Massachusetts brings its casinos online. This will have an immediate effect, not just on state budgets in Connecticut, but on local budgets as well, as the state seeks to replace that funding. Estimates that I've seen are that Connecticut casinos will lose about 20 to 25% of their business to the Massachusetts casinos. In addition to that, our October storm is costing us this year $1.1 million. All told, it's $4 million with a 75% reimbursement from the feds. And we were last year as well able to close out the year in the black on snow. And snow last year, as bad as it was not as bad as this one storm that we had this year. Other issues. Now, this is the same issue that I don't think I've ever run the Worcester numbers, but these are similar to Springfield. But in terms of non-taxable property, 50% of the property in Hartford is non-taxable. Our tax base starts off by being cut in half. Also, there's a state law in Connecticut right now that allows one nonprofit to lease to another nonprofit in a completely different line of business and keep the property to be non-taxable, as opposed to being a commercial venture. So we've seen an increase in the city in non-taxable property. We intend this year to be moving towards a pilot program. We're looking at our model to be, and I took some notes this morning on the library piece, I like that, But we're looking at Boston's model, and we're looking at to move in place a pilot program as a revenue source. So this is the breakout for Hartford in terms of, as the state capital, of where our properties that are non-taxable are. If I give you a number, it's about $260 million that we're missing in revenue from our from the 3/4 of the chart, not including the city. The state right now gives us $37 million. That's about, we get paid about 14%. So catch that though. In Connecticut, the state actually does revenue sharing to its municipalities for the pilot, and they call it a pilot. So all the taxpayers in the state actually subsidize the nonprofits back to the municipalities. Now, I do know for a fact that Massachusetts actually does have a pilot program. I think it's funded about 0.00001% of what you'd get. In Connecticut, it is one of the more significant revenue sharing devices that the state has. So that's where we are as a city, and I spent a few moments on that because I thought it was important. First, just to educate, this is what's going on in a neighboring state. The issues are the same, even the play out is different. For our budget this year, this is the reality of the business environment we're actually in. We've just gone through a reval. Right now in Connecticut, our last revaluation was every 5 years. So everybody in Hartford was paying property taxes as though it was partying as though it's 2006. But yet, you're trying to do business in 2011 at a mill rate of 50, where the Class A space in the downtown is probably $24 a square foot. The reval has had the good news of the bad news is the reval in terms of bringing property taxes into line with our current situation is that in the aggregate, there's a 7% drop in the grand list in the levy in the city. For business though, it is more like 20%. Now, again, what does this mean? This means that for the downtown business owners of a building, you're going to see a drop in Hartford between $2 and $4 a square foot. That's pretty significant in terms of your ability to make a return and your ability to be competitive. We're now going to be competitive with our region. We have a 26% vacancy rate in our downtown. During the years of extreme budget increases that you saw 2 or 3 corporations leave Hartford. We're the home of 4 Fortune 500 companies, a couple of Fortune 100 companies, and what we are also seeing though now is consolidation of the workforce. It is not now that they are leaving, it's that they don't need enough space because the Hartford has 1/3 of its employees working from home every day. So therefore what we're seeing as a shift is a reduction in square footage needs. And the state is not projecting for that 26% vacancy rate that suddenly Boeing, GE, or some other large corporation, and I think it's a trend everywhere. Fidelity is not going to plop down in Boston another 300,000 square feet. So we need to be looking elsewhere for our activity. We're looking, of course, towards housing. We only have 2,500 housing units in our generalized downtown area. We need about another 1,000 units in the downtown, and that's where our program is going. But in general, back to the mill rate, which is really driving this crisis for us, this is where it all gets expressed. We're seeing a $35 million drop in our general property tax reduction. 35 million. Our budget is 550. At 35 million right off the top. Our expenditure drivers, like everybody else, pension and insurance, payroll increases, 5-6 million. So right now what we're seeing is we're seeing the need of a increase in our tax rate by 15. We're at 71. We go up by 15, that, okay, run the numbers, this isn't pretty. And this is a lagging activity. $55 million right now is relatively where our budget gap is in Hartford. Last year, we were in the same place Worcester was with a suite, we're worrying about $6 or $7 million worth of debt. Right now in Hartford, we're worrying about 55. Details. So the revaluation itself takes out $23 million. We had a commercial, I forgot to mention that too, huh? Oops, on top of that 50 mil rate for business, there was also a surcharge. It was decreasing, but it was about a 7% surcharge on business as well. That's another 13 million. With recent legislation that was enacted, we got rid of that $13 million surcharge. This is classically a case where, call it supply side economics if you call it anything, where we are trying to reduce the cost and overhead on business in the hopes that we will be able to generate more. Well, we invest in infrastructure, and no time to talk about it this morning, but we're investing in a public works infrastructure program in addition to housing. We model our activity basically on the approach of the Urban Land Institute and on the Brookings Institute, that basically you need to make your downtowns more livable, more walkable, good places to be, with decent housing options to create a 24-hour activity so that you can be based around your arts and culture functions, so that you're able to attract essentially that creative class that everyone is desperately seeking. So in Hartford, that's been our approach. Well, the reality is that we're facing a $35 million drop. That is, again, as I point out, don't need to go through the details, 15% off the residential, 72% off the commercial. Huge drop. Last slide, last finish up. I don't even need to start talking about OPEB or other future liabilities. Right now, we just got to get through this year. But frankly, our OPEB liabilities are not as bad as Worcester's. One of the things that happened in the 1947 charter of the city of Hartford was insurance capital of the world, was they required that our pension be fully funded. We actually have effectively a fully funded pension. I think we're probably about 50 million, 70 million off of a 100% funded pension. So this places us in a much better position relative to those future liabilities. Our revenues decreases 7%. Our expenditures only increasing 2.9, 54 million. Last point I make is we will close FY11-12 in the black. We'll be able to close it with about maybe $2 to $3 million, be able to add that to the fund balance. But when you talk about what's the impact, and is this national depression, recession causing an impact on municipalities? Yes, when your reval hits. Now maybe you're in a city like Houston, and I think Worcester's been doing fairly decently over the past 10 years for property values. But when you're a city like Providence or Springfield or Hartford, you're seeing significant drops in property value as losses in business employment take place and consolidations occur. The Hartford, the Aetna, all of these went through major restructuring in the last several years. So for us right now, it is still true, and it's a truism, that municipalities are a lagging indicator on the economy. And so again, for Hartford, we're looking forward to another 3 years of challenge. Thank you.
Great job, David. Thank you. I think when we all go back to our jobs a little bit, we should realize how tough some of the other jobs could be from David and Mike's perspective. We now have time for questions. Connie? Jean has a microphone.
This is for Pam. You stated that the state budget is 2.98. It's not on. Can I just speak louder? Sure. You originally said that the state budget was going to increase by 2.98 percentage. And then you discussed the fixed costs, which were going to reduce monies for programs, etc. Your solution for meeting that 2.98 increase is taxes on soda, tobacco, and candy. Are there any other strategies for increasing the state revenues to meet that increase in the state budget?
Okay, so yes, the state budget is estimated to grow for next fiscal year, based on the governor's proposal, 2.98% over the current fiscal year. And as I said, that is a pretty challenging situation because we do have a number of fixed costs like debt and pension. We do have increases in our safety net programs and managing healthcare costs, so that there's a number of big budget busters, and we cannot, within that 2.98% increase, pay for the increases in all of the big budget busters and restore the cuts that we have seen over the last several years. We do have a small number, as you noted, of revenue proposals targeted towards public health and health insurance programs. There is not an appetite in the state legislature for larger tax increases or tax increases on larger or more significant revenue sources. So what we're having to do is we are having to make cuts in employees. We are having to reduce or cut some programs and close some facilities. And we're also trying to find a way to do what we're doing more efficiently and effectively. And that includes investments in IT, so that many of the activities that the government does, we can do more efficiently and effectively with the assistance of information technology. And we're also looking at several reforms, as we've talked about, to manage, for example, Department of Corrections costs and challenges. And we're trying to take on several other opportunities that we hope will help us manage with the resources and dollars that we do have to put towards everything else that we want to fund and see as priorities for the residents of the state, and at the same time manage to provide the dollars that we're required to provide to those big budget busters. A key piece of this is managing healthcare costs. The state spends a lot of money on healthcare costs, so we are hoping to see the legislature act on the governor's commitment to managing healthcare costs this year. We've also done a number of re-procurements of healthcare costs that have saved some resources. The group insurance commissions, healthcare cost increase for the coming year is significantly less than the previous year and than what we're seeing in other healthcare providers. So we are finding it a challenge, but other sources of revenue, significant ones, are not coming our way.
Other questions? Fred?
I'm curious, David, what efforts the City of Hartford is putting into attracting business. Is there a strategy, a marketing strategy that you're employing to have people dedicated to that effort?
Yes. And again, I'd be remiss if I didn't also just introduce Jose Sanchez, our budget director, or Jose Rajan. This is the guy that actually understands this stuff. Yes, we are. But first, we're doing it because Connecticut is actually a high school with the governor as the principal. If you get that model clear, then you understand the state. So right now, we're working with the state to create a branding marketing campaign. You may recall, if you saw this last year, that there was a national map of New England because all the states together went out and branded New England, and Connecticut was not on the map because the prior administration put $1 into marketing. The state is now putting money into marketing the state. They're going to have that out by April, May of this year. We're going to nest our Hartford messaging project that will replace the Rising Star campaign out of that piece. I've also found, based on my experience as a development director, that you cannot effectively market a city where the taxes aren't stable, the government is losing money, and potentially there was a history of corruption. You need to have a transparent and effective government that has stable revenues, that is clearly making its way. You need something to sell. We've done that over the past 2 years in Hartford, is making the city someplace to sell. We are providing incentives to business, lowering our building permit fees, lowering through our tax reform our property taxes, working on our messaging and our marketing campaign with our local Chamber of Commerce, known as the Metro Alliance, and then moving right now for the next move in the operation is to actually revitalize our Development Services Department, which has been focused on getting the projects that haven't been able to get done in Hartford over the last 10 years accomplished, and now bring on board a marketing, cultural affairs, and events director to get people into the city. And now the next piece of that is working with our local brokerage community to start marketing and brokering the community on a property basis, and working with the state. The state's been very active in revitalizing and being a development agent in the city. So it's not one piece, but a very practical program across the board. Because I'll tell you, one person going knocking on doors of business saying, please come to my city, that doesn't work. What works is a whole bunch of pragmatic shoe leather and a lot of hard work by a full team behind the scenes. That can actually get you to be a city that's on the map, or you could have a lot of luck. I'd like luck, but we got to choose hard work.
Thanks, David.
Yep. I'm sorry. This is for you. I know this is a state and federal, problem really, but how has the fallout been in Hartford about the bad decision of eminent domain that the Supreme Court allowed?
Oh, the Kelo decision. That was actually in New London. But the Kelo decision is odd because government won the case. So in point of fact, what was validated in the Supreme Court was the ability of government to decide to take land. The real problem with that eminent domain case, if we're referring to the right one, was actually that the state invested a ton of money in Pfizer, who then built its building and has now left it. So there's a great big piece of property for sale on the New London waterfront that is blocking the water view that Pfizer is not in. So all this storm and turmoil signifying nothing. But the case itself, actually, the government won. The fallout across the country has been that property owners wind up being paid 2 to 3 to 4 times more than their land is worth, because government is so very concerned about the decision making. So, as used to be said at the BRA, the Boston Redevelopment Authority, the secret of the American dream is to get in the way of a government eminent domain project. What happened in California, what happens in cities across the country, is cities are now paying 2 to 3 times what the land is worth to avoid the litigation and the worry they have. In Connecticut, a whole bunch of tripwires were put in place to make sure that there was a process around it. And then the state government, under the last administration, decided that it was too expensive to have people in those offices. So the law's on the books, and there's nobody there to oversee it.
Any other questions? Well, I want to give extreme thanks to Pam, Michael, and David today, to all of you for attending, and please keep tuned to our future events. Thank you very much.